Okay, so here is my song presentation for English 323. If I can, okay, there we go. Okay, so let me move my screener here. So the song I have chosen to do is Environmental Anxiety by British singer-songwriter Ray. Now, this song was featured on her 2023 album, My 21st Century Blues. And a quick little overview of the song before we get into lyric explication, instrumentalization, and socio-historical context is the song pretty much describes how humanity will soon die off due to our own destruction and discrimination towards others. But we'll get into that in just a few seconds. Whoops. Okay. So diving into the lyric explication, it was really hard to pick just a few lyrics because this song is pretty much just like an anthem cry, and there is a lot to pick from that. So I'm kind of just side by side, just gonna kind of dive into some of the lyrics. So one of the ones that comes into the chorus quite a bit is, "You poison the waterfalls and set fire to our rivers of hope." So the first part, "You poison our waterfalls," is referring to how a lot of water supplies now are polluted, making it unsafe to drink, and water is a necessity that humans need to survive. I really like the contrast with the following line, "set fire to our rivers of hope," because besides the contrast to the water, fire can be derived from a drought, which a lot of countries are facing right now due to things going on in the environment. But similarly, water is also seen as a source of survival with oases, trying to make sure that people can necessarily survive. We all need water to survive. And the fact that there is fire in the rivers of hope, it's like our hope is being dried up and there's less and less will to survive at that point. Diving into the first part of the verse, or the first verse is, "Come on, kids, it's time to vote, Boris Johnson's sniffing coke." So Boris Johnson sniffing coke is an allusion to the former United Kingdom Prime Minister who admitted doing drugs in his youth. But at the same time, similarly, Ray is also from London. She is from Britain, so she's very familiar with his politics. At the same time, it's also kind of an urge to, it's an urge from her to younger generations saying, if you want to make change, you have to go out and vote if you want to be the change for the future and future generations. Now, the next two bullet points on the left are kind of tied together in the same, like they pretty much follow one another, but they kind of have different contexts. So the first one is, "All the children are depressed, not the future we had hoped." And the first part is a reference to the mental health crisis going on around the world and how it can also be seen as, people are expecting children to be happy with what's going on in the world, but more and more kids now are being diagnosed with anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD. And so I think it's also a reference to her saying, we expect all these children to be happy, but more and more children are becoming depressed. And this also kind of ties into the following bullet point, which is, "Little girls aren't safe at home. She's scrolling up and down her phone. She hates her life, she hates herself, and she's 12 years old." And I think this is a really great way of her explaining about how the youth is now becoming more and more addicted to social media, and more often than not, it's young girls who kind of are seen in this comparison trap with social media, especially for young girls when they see all these other so-called prettier girls who look more beautiful, they have a seemingly more perfect life in school and maybe a boyfriend and all of these other factors. And there's the comparison factor of she hates her life, she doesn't like the way she looks, but she's so young, and that can be really detrimental to the youth's mental health these days, which is very interesting to have a singer-songwriter talk about this, especially for a young age. But this will also come in on the second part of my lyric explication, which is, The next part is these social apps are now our gods since dopamine from likes and shares. So this is a really great metaphor of talking about how humans these days practically worship social media and how almost everyone these days has some form of social media, be it Facebook, X, Instagram, Snapchat, Pinterest, whatever it is. Like there's always some sort of social media platform that we're on. And by comparing it to those gods, we're always on it, and how pretty much a lot of people these days are determining their worth from how many likes a post can get, how many shares they get, comments they get, and how that kind of dictates our life. And I think it's a really bold statement for a modern singer-songwriter to talk about how impactful social media is, and not in a positive way, rather a very negative way. And following that is then we find peace from drugs and sex and prescription anxiety meds. And so that also kind of talks about how in order to cope with how we feel about whether it's from social media, the state of the world, which I will also get more into later on with some of the other things she talks about in this song, we turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms, drugs, sex, and even those prescription anxiety meds, which can be helpful to some people, depending on what type it is, especially if it's like a benzodiazepine like Xanax, it can become an addiction. And at the same time, not only are these unhealthy coping mechanisms, but they're also unhealthy coping mechanisms that can potentially lead to addiction. And addiction is also a very common problem in all areas of the world still. Next part is sweep the truth under the rug, feed us plastic GMO crops. So a great idiom of sweep the truth under the rug, meaning you want to hide something embarrassing that you don't want to be discovered. And it's kind of maybe not an illusion, but a reference to how politicians are hiding how serious the world state is actually in, and how it almost seems like they're downplaying how bad the world is right now. And they're just hiding it from us, even though we fully know what is going on in the world today. The feed us plastic GMO crops is also talking about how more and more crops these days are turning to become genetically modified because of pesticides and herbicides. Insects are eating them. There's longer shelf lives if they are genetically modified. It makes them look more appealing. And so it's pretty much talking about how even the food we eat these days isn't even all natural and good for us. And I love this next bullet point on the left, which is, we don't need self-motivation. Robots will take all our jobs. And that's right before it cuts back to the chorus, which is talking about how humans are becoming lazier and lazier every day, especially now because we have so many technological advancements that are doing our jobs for us. And especially now with the rise of artificial intelligence in our technology, it's becoming these sorts of technological devices are making our jobs quicker. There's not as many needs for humans anymore because, well, robots are doing the jobs for us and almost rendering our jobs useless. And so it's talking about how humans don't necessarily need to, they're losing that will to go to work and find that motivation because the robots are taking their jobs, or taking our jobs for us. So kind of talking about how technology is going to kind of be the downfall of our world. Now, the rest of this is from the second verse in the song. So the first part is, you turn a blind eye when the drunk man falls. Did you ever think, why is the drunk man drunk? And I really, really like this one too, because, well, one, there's the idiom of blatant ignorance, of turning a blind eye, especially when it talks about addiction, dismissing people instead of the system. Earlier, she talks about drugs and, turning to find that coping mechanism for peace. But I like this one too, especially because I feel like today in society, a lot of people talk about, if you see a drunk person on the road or a homeless person on the road, you instantly blame that person for getting themselves into the problem. And she's talking about how, yes, we tend to dismiss people instead of the system that puts them in that position in the first place. Hence the question, do you ever think, why is the drunk man drunk? We never know, but it's likely the system that comes with it. And that kind of goes on to the next part. and the rich get rich and the rest get sunk. So it refers to how with the economy these days, the rich keep on getting richer and how it's almost nearly impossible to become middle class at this point. Because at this point right here, it's almost nearly impossible right now. Even like poor people continue to stay poor. It's very slow middle class ground, and the rich just keep raking in money in the economy. And so it is like a class issue as well in this. The next bullet point is forest burning, oil spills, melting ice, and methane gas, toxic waste, and plastic fish. We're digging holes to hide our trash. So it ties back to the title of the song, Environmental Anxiety, but it just lists a variety of those environmental problems that are currently plaguing the earth on almost every single continent. And it's very interesting too. And what I also thought is a very clever reference to is toxic waste is a type of sour candy, and plastic fish is, you know, not maybe a reference to Swedish fish, but both are, you know, candy and, you know, maybe not the best food to eat, especially with all of the preservatives that go into it. So I also think that that's a really great reference for that well. And usually because these candies are in little individual wrappers, we're digging holes to hide our trash, kind of ties it in to that. I also really like this one too, especially because it's so prevalent. Unity reeks in all our songs, but we drew borders across our lands. 1,000 years we've been at war. When the planet is dead, we will all hold hands. I love the imagery that the first part of the lyric evokes, especially talking about how unity is talked about in so many songs that you can almost smell it, the stench. It's like overwhelming of how much we talk about unity in our songs or books and how like we need to band together and everything. It's so vivid just to imagine it in the first place. And I really like how that contrasts with how we're all supposed to get along, but we have been at war with each other for literally thousands of years, different countries fighting for a myriad of reasons. But I love how it's the final part of that lyric is when the planet is dead, we will all hold hands. It talks about how it doesn't matter when we're all dead, we all go back into the earth. We all will come back to the earth, the one that is currently in trouble. So it kind of has this cycle that is built into it, which I think is just a wonderful reference to that. So now we're going to get into instrumentalization, and this will get a little choppy just because I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the presentation, and I also have the song pulled up as well. So I know you didn't want to talk about background beat, but this is a little important because it does kind of tie in with counterpoint. So with this background beat at the start of the song, if I can get out of this, perfect. I will pull up the song. It sounds like, especially at the beginning, if you listen really closely, it's throughout the entirety of the song. It's this kind of like dum da day, dum da day, dum da day. It's this part that goes throughout the entire song. And if you listen really closely, it almost sounds like this little beat sounds like it's saying doomsday, which kind of ties in with how the overall summary of the song is like, we're all going to die off eventually. And it ties back in later in the song, which is really cool. But I'll play this first part. So listen to this like little doomsday, and I'll let it play into the first part of the chorus because you'll hear how it's in the background even when Ray starts singing. How did you ever dream? How did you ever think it was about to happen? It was a waterfall. The clouds are rivers of hope. I love how that sounds, and it goes like that throughout the rest of the song. So it's kind of like, so it creates that counterpoint, kind of following on with that, where there's that song in there's that like little I'll call it the doomsday part throughout the rest of my presentation, but this little like doomsday voice, it's it's in the background of the song. And I think it creates a really good counterpoint because Ray is here, she's talking and well, talking, singing about all of these issues that are going on in the world, but there's always that little doomsday in the back of your head. So it's kind of like an ominous warning that you can't get out of your head while the rest of the song is just playing. And I'll even just kind of jump ahead to where she's singing in the song. And you can hear how it's like that later on.
And cold, the children are depressed, love the future weird hope. Cause I'll take a house, she's going down our soul.
You can hear it even though it's very faint. So it's kind of like that ominous, like it's gonna happen someday, this doomsday is gonna happen someday, which I think is a really great point that the song brings up. Now, this is coming back to part of the lyric explication, but I think it's a really great addition to the song. So I'm going to jump ahead to the point where she's talking about the dopamine from likes and shares. And there's a variety of phone notification sounds that go off to replicate social media. And I think it's a great touch to the song. And it just kind of, you know, it kind of cements that feeling.
I
love how that was added. I think that was a really great touch to the song. Now, this is a part too, which could also be talked about. I could have talked about as well in the lyrics, lyric explication. There's a part in the song where she starts listing off all of these types of discrimination that are currently plaguing the world, which is she talks about people being classist, sexist, racist, ableist, fascist, ageist, and homophobic. So a bunch of different types of discrimination. And when she sings this, it's almost like a rap, I should say. She rattles them off to the point where it almost sounds like she's breathless and she's tired of all this discrimination. And I think that that's very helpful. But before I do that, you'll listen to that. She sounds very breathless, but this goes on to the next part of the instrumentalization, where following that huge list of discriminations, she says the lyric, country leaders fucked our futures and they think we haven't noticed. And that follows immediately after the discrimination. And you'll notice that the music cuts out completely. And it's just her saying that lyric. And I think this is a really good point of emphasis because it allows the readers to focus on the message saying, listen up, the world leaders, they are not paying attention. They do not care about you. And they think we're so oblivious to what's going on in the world when really we are fully aware of what is going on in our world today. So this will start out at the part where she is listing off the discriminations. Let's see. There we go.
Yes, the sexist, racist, ableist, fascist, ageist, homophobic, country leaders fuck our futures and they think we haven't noticed who's burning on the spill.
She's a genius lyricist. I will just say this, like this album, side note, is amazing. I highly recommend listening to this entire album because she's an amazing songwriter. And then I like the last part of the song, which is what I'm gonna kind of play right here, is so that little doomsday voice is still playing in the background throughout the song. But in the middle of the third chorus, it fades out and a siren comes in. And it almost acts like a signal about how the doomsday is finally here and there's no more singing the rest of the song. It just kind of like the doomsday fades in, or the doomsday fades out and the siren comes in. And it's kind of showing about how this doomsday is here. We have to be weary about that. And at the same time, behind the siren for the end of the song, there seems to be a newscaster, which you can hear. And a lot of the words are very incoherent, but it does sound like you can hear the word disaster in there, which is really helpful. And I'll probably just end up playing the rest of the song at this point, because right after that, there's just this kind of quirky little outro where it's saying, where it's Ray talking and she says, attention citizens, please evacuate the country in an orderly fashion and leave behind any personal belongings that you don't need. And then she like laughs. And so it is spoken like a PSA, and there's like some elevator music going on in the background. And it's very calm. But when she starts laughing at the end after, oh, get any personal belongings that you don't need, it kind of glitches into a robot voice at the end that like glitches and fades out, which kind of comes back to that robots will take all our jobs. So it's not even like it's her voice. It's like the robot that's taken her job for her. So I'll get to the part and I'll let the song play out until the end, but you'll hear how the doomsday will fade out in the background and go to that siren. And like I said, I'll let the rest of the song play out because this all kind of happens within very quick references to each other. So you can listen to how that doomsday fades out, how this siren and this newscaster come in, and then this little spoken PSA.
The poison of water falls.
That siren.
So rivers of home. We're all gonna die. Oh, heaven. In Attention, citizens. Please evacuate the country in an orderly fashion and leave behind any personal belongings that you don't need.
It's such a great song. It's literally an amazing song. And then I'll just quick get into this because I mean it's the lyrics are pretty upfront with how this is the lyrics are pretty upfront with how the socio-historical context. Let me move this out of the way. Perfect. So this song did just come out in February 3rd of 2023. So this song just came out last year. So it's still very new. And Rhea's very in touch with how the current state of the world is. And especially in the last few years, more and more people have spoken up about the state of the world with climate change, how people are being discriminated against, protests, advocating more for world peace and women's rights and just overall rights in general, LGBTQ rights. And so more and more people are speaking out about this. And I think that this is a really great song that ties in all of the issues in the world. And like I had mentioned in here, the issues are fairly general as Rhea covers a lot of ground in just the songs, I think about 3 minutes and 15 seconds. So it's not a very long song, but she also covers so much ground with a bunch of different issues that is plaguing the world right now, which I think is amazing that she's able to cover and talk about all of these issues and kind of calling out the government about it, which is what I've mentioned. The way she tackles this song is talking about, she's pretty much calling out our government, not just our United States government, but she's talking about world leaders in general, saying about what they're doing wrong. And she's being very honest and being very blatant about what is going on in the world. You know, here are all these environmental issues at home. Social media, yes, it's great, but also we are becoming addicted to it. There's all these discriminations we face in the world and how we are such liars when we say we should all be united and celebrate world peace, but we're all at war with each other. So she's pretty much telling the world like it is, which I think is very, very brave of her to do so. Like I said, she's talking about the government and world leaders and about how they're failing us. And this definitely ties back to the themes we've talked about in class, where she's challenging these hegemonic powers about how all of these world leaders are politicians. You know, these are the people that are making the decisions for how the world is run. But at the same time, they are letting us down with the decisions that they are making. Hence all of these downfalls that they're pointing out in the song. And I think this is also a really great tie, especially now in 2024, where especially like right now, in the US, like one of the things that's going on in the government right now is they're trying to ban TikTok. But at the same time, there is a war over in Israel and Palestine, And instead of talking about how can we, you know, try and help stop this war, we're focusing on trying to ban a social media app. Like, you know, there's that balance of talking about how the world is run, and yet at the same time, these people who are in charge of how we thrive in society and function, they are letting us down with everything that is going on in the world. Besides that, that is my song presentation. At the same time, I I hope you just go out and listen to the rest of this album. It is a really, really good album. She talks a lot about addiction and growing up in a Black neighborhood in London. She has a whole song called Body Dysmorphia, talking about body issues and body image issues. It's a great song. I hope you enjoyed this song, and maybe you'll think about teaching it next year for class. I think that you can't get more upfront with issues we've talked about in this class than this song.